The morning everything changed. I was holding a parking validation stamp I didn't need, and standing in a lobby I'd walked through 400 times without anyone looking up. I was 28, 2.5 years into a mid-sized logistics company based out of Calgary, and I had learned very early that being reliable in an unglamorous way was its own kind of trap. If something needed untangling quietly, it found me. If a manager needed something done before a Monday meeting and didn't want to explain why it was last minute, that call came to me too. I wasn't invisible exactly. I was just the kind of person people forgot to introduce in rooms. That Tuesday in February, I was heading up to the 14th floor with a binder of freight compliance reports. Nobody had asked for in writing, but everyone would need in an hour. I had my laptop bag on one shoulder and coffee going cold in my other hand. The elevator doors were almost shut when a hand came through. Josephine stepped in. I'd seen her from across conference rooms maybe 3 times in 2 years. Senior Vice President of Operations. The kind of person who made directors pull their chairs in when she entered. She was the reason 3 regional contracts had been restructured the year before, and she was also the reason 2 department heads had quietly moved on after a review process. Nobody talked about openly. 43 maybe. Always put together in a way that looked effortless but wasn't. She had the kind of composure that came from decades of being the smartest person in rooms that kept underestimating her. She stepped in, pressed 14, and didn't look at me. I was fine with that. Then the elevator dropped 2 centimeters and stopped. Not a gradual slow. A hard stop. The lights flickered twice, went to emergency amber and held. The whole car gave a low shudder that I felt in my back teeth. Neither of us said anything for about 3 seconds. Then Josephine hit the door open button twice, controlled and deliberate. Nothing. She pressed the emergency call button. The intercom crackled, went quiet, crackled again, and a voice that sounded genuinely uncertain told us building maintenance was working through a power relay issue, affecting elevators 3 and 5, and that someone would update us. "That's not helpful," she said. Not loudly, just a statement aimed at the wall. I set my coffee on the floor, crouched, and held the call button down. "Any estimate on a timeline?" I asked. The voice said it could be 5 minutes or it could be 30. I let go of the button and stood. "We have air, lights are holding. If there was a real mechanical failure, we'd have heard different sound. It's probably a control board issue between floors." Josephine turned and actually looked at me for the first time. "You sound confident about that. I'm trying to give us something useful to think about instead of the ceiling." She considered that for a moment. Then she turned back to the door and exhaled once through her nose. I noticed it immediately, the way she went too still. The way her jaw set like she was concentrating on not concentrating on where she was. It wasn't dramatic, that was what made it worse. She wasn't someone who did dramatic. I kept my voice easy. "What floor were you trying to reach?" She glanced over. 14, the Hendricks call? You know about it? I built the compliance deck for it last week. Freight routing amendments for the BC corridor. Something shifted in her expression, not warmly, just an update. Like she'd filed something under a different category. "That was you." 3rd slide had a formatting issue. I fixed it before it went up. She looked at me the way people do when they realize they've been using something for months without knowing who made it. We stood in silence for a little while. Then she pressed her fingers flat against the wall once, like she was just confirming it was there. And that's when I understood the enclosed space was getting to her in a specific way she wasn't going to name out loud. I didn't make it a thing. I just started talking. Not about the elevator. I asked about the Hendricks call, what outcome she was walking and hoping for. She answered, short at first then longer. She knew the file cold, every amended clause, every counterpoint the BC team was likely to raise. She wasn't reviewing, she was thinking out loud, and once she started, she didn't stop. I listened. I asked the right questions. At one point she went quiet in a different way, hands loose at her sides, and I could see her recalibrating whatever her nervous system was doing. "I don't love this," she said, meaning the elevator, meaning enclosed and stopped and no exit. "I know. It's a hard kind of weight. You're not rattled. I've been stuck before. Library elevator at U of C 40 minutes. No phone signal. Just me and a broken water fountain that kept clicking." She almost smiled. "What did you do?" "Read the inspection certificate on the wall until I had it memorized. Turned out, it expired 8 months prior." That got a real breath of a laugh out of her. Low and quick. Gone before she seemed to decide what to do with it. It took 41 minutes. Long enough that the building had sent someone to manually release the doors from the floor above. When the gap opened a foot below the 13th floor landing, a maintenance worker and a building manager were there looking relieved in that specific way people look when they know they were about to have a very bad liability conversation. I climbed out first and turned back. Josephine looked at my hand for exactly 1 second, then took it. Clean, firm. She was up and straightened in one motion. said a brief thank you to the maintenance team in a way that was professional but not warm. By noon I had assumed that was the full story. Then the Hendricks call collapsed. I found out from the sound of it. I was at my desk reformatting a logistics summary when I heard the tone shift down the hall. Not shouting. Worse, the controlled silence that means something has gone wrong enough that people have stopped performing normal. The issue turned out to be in the amended routing table. Someone had used an older version of the BC freight parameters, the ones that hadn't yet incorporated the January regulatory update from Transport Canada. Two of the amended clauses were citing figures that had been superseded, not by a lot, but enough that if the Hendricks team noticed before a correction, it would cost us credibility on the whole proposal. People were doing the thing they do, moving fast but not forward, talking loudly in the wrong directions. I pulled up the shared drive, found the version discrepancy, cross-referenced the Transport Canada bulletin from January 14th, rebuilt the two affected clauses with the corrected figures, formatted a clean summary page, printed 4 copies, and walked them into the boardroom. Josephine looked up from the table. The room went quiet in that specific way where everyone is pretending they're not watching something. The routing parameters in clauses 7 and 9 were pulled from the pre-January version, I said. These are the corrected figures, the call can restart. She took the pages, read for about 8 seconds, then looked at me. How long for the live document? 4 minutes for the main deck, 7 if you want the appendix reviewed. Do both. I did. I stayed in the adjacent space while the call resumed. About 20 minutes in, the Hendricks representative asked a question about cross-border dwell time calculations that the director beside Josephine started to answer in a way that wasn't wrong but wasn't precise. Josephine glanced at me through the glass. I held up 2 fingers and mouthed the actual figure. She relayed it without missing a beat. The room had a different texture when the call ended. Small shift, but real. I was packing up when Josephine came out. She stopped at the end of the table. I don't know your name, she said. Not unkindly, just honestly. Kieran. Kieran Daly. She looked at me the way she had in the elevator, like a file being moved to a different folder. You kept today from becoming expensive twice. I didn't know what to do with that, so I said, I just worked with what was in front of me. Her mouth moved in a way that said she approved of that answer more than she expected to. Come to my office at 5:30, she said. I want to show you something. Then she walked off and I stood there with my laptop bag, and a printed correction nobody had asked for and the strange, uncomfortable feeling that being noticed might be its own kind of problem. At 5:30 I went up expecting a task. What I got was something else. Her office was a corner unit on the 14th floor with windows on 2 sides, and a view west toward the mountains that on clear days looked like someone had propped up a painting and forgotten to take it down. She was at the long table instead of her desk, jacket off, a set of printouts spread in front of her. You're early, she said. You said 5:30, it's 5:28, I assumed traffic. She looked up over the page. Sit down. The printouts were an internal proposal for a 3-year supply chain restructure, regional redistribution of freight routes, updated carrier contracts, a warehouse consolidation plan that touched facilities in Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Halifax. It was dense, ambitious, and about 30% longer than it needed to be. She slid the top section toward me. What's wrong with this? I read the first 3 pages. The executive summary buries the cost savings in paragraph 4. The board will check out before they get there. The Winnipeg consolidation is justified with 2021 volume data. The pandemic numbers are going to get questioned, and the carrier section reads like it was written by 2 different people who didn't compare notes. She watched me. Anything else? The Edmonton rationale is strong. Lead with that. She picked up her pen. Okay. We worked until 8:15. She was faster than anyone I'd worked with before. No wasted motion. No unnecessary explanation. When something was right, she moved on without commenting, which I understood after a while was its own form of acknowledgement. When something was wrong, she said so in one sentence and expected me to fix it without needing the context repeated. Around 7 someone left dinner outside the door. She looked at the bag and then at me. Eat, she said. I'm fine, Kieran. Eat. We ate at the end of the table while the city went dark and the mountains disappeared into the evening. It should have felt strange. It didn't. The pressure in the room had changed shape. Less 2 people in a hierarchy. More 2 people inside a problem trying to solve it from the same side. She asked where I'd gone to school. University of Calgary, Commerce. First in my family to finish a 4-year degree. I'd grown up in Red Deer, worked summers at a grain elevator outside town, paid for 2 years of school myself before the 3rd-year scholarship came through. And yet, she said, closing her water bottle, you don't carry yourself like someone trying to prove something. I figure that's usually the thing that gets in the way. She put the bottle down and looked at me. Careful. That almost sounded like something. Self-awareness? Confidence. She said it like there was a difference worth keeping track of. Maybe the elevator shook something loose. I laughed. She didn't, quite. But there was something in her expression that I hadn't seen before. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of attention that was different from professional regard. After that night, things changed in the way that's hard to point to while it's happening. She started pulling me in on material. At first it was logistics work I was already adjacent to, briefing notes before client calls, clean up on decks that had gotten too long. Then it was earlier in the process. Then it was calls from the back of her car on her way to the airport. Me at my desk with my laptop open while traffic noise filtered through her phone, and she talked in clipped clear lines about what she needed and what didn't need to exist anymore. My schedule bent around her pace. I stopped doing the small reactive work that used to eat most of my week and started sitting in rooms where the conversations were actually deciding things. People noticed. Of course they did. Offices are just organized villages with better coffee. A senior coordinator named Troy, who'd called me buddy for 2 years, started using my full name in meetings. A manager named Darla asked someone else within earshot why I was on the distribution list for a proposal that was technically 2 levels above my current role. A guy named Scott from the analytics team stopped mid-sentence when I walked into the kitchen and waited until I left to continue. Nobody said anything direct. They never do at first. It moves through the building like weather. One Thursday night, Josephine and I were the last ones left after a budget review that had run 2 hours over, because 2 directors couldn't stop arguing about who had approved a decision that was already made and spent. She came out of the boardroom, looked at me still standing there with my notes, and said, "Are you heading home?" I told her eventually, "Come with me first." It wasn't an invitation. It was the next thing on a list she was running in her head. Her driver took us downtown to a restaurant near the river that I wouldn't have picked for myself because I wouldn't have known how to act in it. Low lighting, small tables, staff who recognized her without making a display of it. The kind of place where the menu has no prices on the customer copy. I asked if this was still work. She said it started that way. We ordered. The conversation did what it had been doing for weeks, moved through the professional, then slipped sideways without either of us steering it there. She asked what I actually wanted. Not the polished answer, the real one. I told her I was tired of being the person that management trusted in private and forgot about publicly. Tired of doing the thing that fixed the room and then watching someone else be thanked for it. She set her fork down, looked at me for a long moment. "That can change," she said. The way she said it wasn't a comfort. It was more like a decision she'd already started making and was only now telling me about. When we left, rain was coming down hard off the bow and the streetlights were blurring in the puddles. Her driver was 8 minutes out. We stood under the awning of the restaurant while cabs moved past in the dark. She had one hand around her phone and one tucked at her side, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked tired in a way she wasn't performing control over. Just tired. Present. Real. "Do you know why I keep calling you in?" she asked. I should have been careful. "Because I make things easier." Part of it. She turned slightly, close enough that I caught the clean cedar scent of her coat. "The other part is that you never try to collect on anything. You just do the work and let the work speak. That's rarer than you think." My throat went dry. Is that a good thing? It depends what you do next. The car still wasn't there. Neither of us moved. When she reached up and fixed the collar of my coat, just 2 fingers, just a small adjustment, like she was correcting something that had been slightly wrong. I forgot most of what I'd thought I knew about keeping things professional. Her hand stayed a moment too long. My hand found hers before I had time to talk myself out of it. She looked at me, steady as she always was, but there was something behind it that I hadn't seen from across boardrooms. "Kieran," she said quietly. "That should have been a warning." It didn't land like one. I kissed her there on the sidewalk with February rain hitting the pavement a foot away, and the city going about its business like none of it was happening. She kissed me back without hesitation, not rushed, not uncertain, the way she did everything, direct, decided, entirely herself. When the car pulled up, we got in without much said. She gave her address in Elbow Park. That was the moment I understood this had already become something I couldn't call simple. Monday, she had me reassigned. Official designation was cross-divisional operations support. In practice, it meant I stopped filing reactive work requests and started sitting in preparation meetings for client engagements that used to happen several floors above my name. She didn't announce it. She just started using me in front of the people who mattered. And once she did, nobody wanted to be the first one to question it to her face. The first time it landed for real was during a regional strategy session with senior operations and the Western account team. A manager named Victor cut across me midpoint and said there were probably more senior voices better suited to weigh in. I was about to step back, old habit. Josephine set her pen down flat on the table. No, she said. Let him finish. The room went quiet in the way that offices go quiet when the actual meeting has just shifted and everyone knows it, but no one's going to say so. Victor leaned back like he'd never meant anything by it. I finished my point. Josephine backed it without editorializing. 10 minutes later the room was working off my framework. That was new. So was the travel. A few weeks later she took me to Vancouver for 2 days, a logistics summit with 3 major Western carriers. Officially I was there for prep and deck management. In practice I was in every conversation she needed me in. In the car from YVR, in the lobby before the dinner, in the side room running numbers at 6 in the morning before the main session started. She liked having me close. I could feel it not just at night but in motion. In the sealed spaces between one thing and the next where she dropped the public version of herself for a few minutes and just said exactly what she was thinking without editing it. On the second night in Vancouver a box was at the hotel desk with my room number on it. No note. Inside was a charcoal jacket, cut properly, better than anything I owned. I texted her. This is a problem. The reply came back in under a minute. Wear it tomorrow. I did. I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror the next morning and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked like someone else, because I looked like someone the room might actually listen to before making up its mind. And they did. That was the part that unsettled me. Back in Calgary the whispers got less quiet. A woman named Priya from procurement smiled at me in the hall one afternoon and said, "Must be nice," in a tone that was doing the opposite of smiling. Troy stopped copying me on things he used to copy me on, then overcorrected and started CCing me on things I hadn't asked for, which was somehow more pointed. Victor cornered me in the stairwell 2 weeks after the strategy session. "You're moving pretty fast," he said. "For someone who was formatting compliance reports 4 months ago. Maybe I was better at it than people thought." His smile flattened. "Maybe someone decided they liked having you around." That landed exactly where he wanted it to. Before I could figure out what to say, Josephine came around the corner from the 14th floor landing. She took in Victor's face and mine in one look, and that was all she needed. "Victor," she said, "walk with me." He did. By end of week 2 of his accounts had been handed to other managers, and he was no longer in the review chain for anything tied to her division. Nobody explained it. It moved through the office the way those things do, carried by implication, and people watching which direction the current was going. That was when I understood the full shape of what was happening. She wasn't just making room for me in the evenings. She was changing the ground underneath me during the day, moving people who treated me as furniture to positions where they couldn't reach me. Putting my name in conversations I wasn't in the room for, making the people who'd been filing me under useful but replaceable quietly recalculate. And once I saw it clearly I couldn't unsee it anywhere. New items on my calendar. Meetings I hadn't asked to be included in. The moment during a client call when a VP asked a clarifying question and Josephine looked at me first before her own director, and I knew everyone in the room had noticed. One evening late, after everyone else had gone home, I was in her office reviewing variance data for a quarterly package when she came around the desk and stood beside me. Close enough that I could feel the shift in the room. "You've stopped looking surprised," she said. "I'm still surprised." "No," she said it quietly. "Now you're adapting. Those are different things." She rested one hand on the back of my chair. The city was dark outside the windows. The mountains were invisible in the February black. "Did you plan this?" I asked. Her expression barely changed. I noticed what was already there. The rest was just removing what was in the way. That answer stayed with me, because by then I understood both sides of what was true at the same time. I wanted her more every week, and my entire professional life was being restructured, because she had decided I was worth restructuring it for. By the time spring came around, I wasn't the person managers called when something needed quiet fixing anymore. I was the person they looked for when a situation got complicated. Josephine had moved me into a formal role, not a placeholder, a real one, with a title that showed up on the organizational chart, and a scope that covered carrier relations and operational compliance across the Western Division. I dressed for rooms differently because I had to. I spoke in them differently because I'd learned that if you leave a pause, someone more comfortable with authority will fill it. So I stopped leaving pauses. The office stopped treating me like background. The whispers changed tone, from disbelief to something closer to wariness. People still talk, offices always do. But they talked around me now instead of over me, and the difference between those two things was bigger than I would have thought before I lived it. Josephine kept pushing. She had me lead the renewals on 2 of the company's mid-tier Western carrier agreements. Then she put me in a rate negotiation call with a national freight company that should have had a director on it, and let me carry the middle section when the conversation stuck. A month later, I was presenting regional risk updates to a senior leadership group that had barely registered my name the prior year. I walked into that room with my notes tight and my pulse high, and by the time I walked out, two of the people who'd sat through the whole thing were asking me follow-up questions like I was expected to have answers, which I was, because I did. That night, Josephine and I were in the back of her car moving through the tail end of Macleod Trail traffic, and she said, "You were ready for that 6 months ago." No, I wasn't. She turned her head slightly. You were. The room wasn't. She paused. Those aren't the same problem. That was how she understood it. Not as fixed levels you earned by waiting. More like doors that most people accept as locked and never actually try, because they've already decided who's allowed through them. And once she decided I was one of those people, she didn't slow down about it. The last real resistance came in April. A director from the Eastern Accounts team named Warren. Not the Warren in my past, a different one, older. Territorial in the specific way that men get when they've held a position long enough to confuse seniority with ownership. Tried to have me removed from a carrier negotiation file by simply sending the preparation materials without my name on the chain. Small move, the kind that's supposed to read as accidental. Josephine forwarded it to me with one line, "Join us anyway." So I did. I walked into the meeting room 12 minutes after it had started, took the open chair, set my folder on the table, and said nothing that acknowledged I hadn't been there from the start. Warren looked up, looked annoyed, said nothing because Josephine was at the head of the table and looking at her own pages. Midway through, he tried to dismiss an alternative routing proposal I'd flagged, the one that would reduce dwell time in Halifax by about 18%, by saying it hadn't been sufficiently validated. Josephine asked him if he'd reviewed the supporting data in the appendix. He said he'd reviewed the main document. She looked at him for a moment. Maybe finish the appendix before you decide it's insufficient. Nobody said anything after that. 3 weeks later, Warren was moved to a national accounts advisory role, less operational, less involved in anything with teeth. The reassignment was announced in an internal email at 4:50 on a Friday, which told you everything about how voluntary it was. I would be dishonest if I said I felt clean about all of it, uncomplicated. I knew I was good at what I did, better than the role I'd started in, better than the way people had been treating me when this all began. I'd put in the work before Josephine ever looked twice at me, and everything she'd seen in that elevator was real. But I also knew she had accelerated everything, cleared lanes, moved weight, put my name in rooms before I'd built the kind of track record that would have gotten me there alone. And the complicated thing was that the more clearly I understood that, the less I wanted to step back from it. Because what was between us wasn't constructed. It was real. I'd been in enough things that weren't to know the difference. Late nights after travel, after long days where she'd been the version of herself that the building needed, she would go still with me in a way I never saw anywhere else. No performance. No executive composure. Just tired and sharp and present, looking at the ceiling of my apartment or the hotel room, or wherever we happened to be, talking through whatever she was actually thinking with no interest in packaging it. I stopped trying to separate what was professional from what was personal. By then it was the same thing, and I'd stopped pretending that was a problem I needed to solve. The final turn came in June. A major carrier partnership the company had been working toward for 14 months was finally at signature stage. 3-year agreement. Volume commitments across all Western facilities, the kind of deal that would change the operational conversation for the next 2 years at least. Josephine had been the primary relationship manager on it from the beginning. The closing meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning in Winnipeg, face-to-face with the senior team. The Wednesday before, a governance issue pulled her into a board call that couldn't be rescheduled. She called me at 7 in the evening. "I need you in Winnipeg tomorrow." I held the phone. For the prep for the meeting, I was quiet for a second. "Josephine, you know this file better than anyone. You know where they're going to push back. You know what's a hard line and what's a test." "Kieran, I'm serious. This is a Kieran." Her voice was calm. Not impatient, just clear. "I know you. I know what you know. You've been inside this negotiation for 3 months. Stop arguing from the version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore. That hit somewhere specific." She told me legal had the final language ready. Finance had signed off on the concession parameters 2 hours ago. The Winnipeg team's lead negotiator had a habit of circling back to volume minimums when he felt he was losing ground on rate. I should expect that and not give, and she wanted a call the second I was out of the room. "The car leaves for the airport at 5:15, she said. "Don't be late." Then before she hung up, "You know what's in front of you. Go do it." I was on a WestJet flight by 6:30 the next morning, somewhere above Saskatchewan with a window seat, and 2 marked-up binders in my bag, and the kind of quiet that happens at altitude when you have nothing left to prepare and all you can do is sit with what you know. I thought about the elevator. 41 minutes between floors. Josephine pressing her hand flat against the wall to confirm it was there. The way she'd taken my hand when the gap opened. I thought about the first time I walked a corrected deck into a boardroom, and the way the room's temperature changed. I thought about the stairwell with Victor, and the charcoal jacket, and the way she'd fixed my collar in the rain and what came after. A year ago I was the person who showed up early to set out the materials, and left before anyone took credit. I formatted documents that went out under other people's names. I handled the quiet disasters and then went back to my desk. Now I was on a plane with a company card, a negotiating mandate, and a deal that had 14 months of work behind it, waiting in a boardroom in Winnipeg for me to walk in and close it. The descent into James Armstrong Richardson was smooth. The city came up slowly out of flat prairie, low and wide, winter pale even in June, the way Manitoba gets when the sun goes sideways instead of overhead. I took a cab to the hotel, changed, reviewed my notes for 20 minutes, and then walked into the meeting. 4 people on their side. Our Winnipeg regional director, who looked surprised to see me and smart enough not to say so. The lead negotiator, heavyset, methodical, the kind of person who slows down exactly when you expect him to speed up, looked at me once across the table measuring. We shook hands. I said I was representing the SVP of operations and that I had full authority to finalize terms. He nodded, wrote something down. The meeting started. 3 hours and 40 minutes later, we had a signed letter of intent, a confirmed closing timeline for the full agreement, and a volume commitment that came in 4% above what finance had flagged as our best realistic outcome. The volume minimum came up twice. I didn't move. He circled back, framed it differently, tried the patient approach. I held the line and told him directly what we could offer on rate flexibility in exchange, which was the trade Josephine had told me to have ready but not lead with. He sat back and looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "You're not what I expected." I said, "What did you expect?" He almost smiled. Someone who needed to call home first. I told him I had everything I needed in the room. We shook hands again when it was done. I called Josephine from the parking lot outside, standing in June prairie wind that pushed straight across the flat nothing and hit you with a cold edge even in summer. She picked up on the second ring. I gave her the terms, all of them. She was quiet for a moment. 4 above target, she said. He wanted movement on volume minimums. I held. Good, a pause. Good. And I could hear in her voice the particular satisfaction of a person who made a decision and turned out to be right about it. Not surprise. Just confirmation of something she'd already known. I stood there in the Winnipeg parking lot with wind in my ears and the flat sky going on forever in every direction, and the weight of the last 14 months sitting quietly in my chest. A year ago I was standing in a lobby no one looked up in, carrying a binder of reports for people who couldn't have told you my last name. Now I had just closed the largest carrier agreement the Western Division had put together in 4 years, and the person who had trusted me to do it was on the phone, and the way she said good sounded less like approval, and more like arrival. Like I had gotten to the place she had always believed I was headed. I didn't say any of the things I was thinking. I just said, "I'll debrief you properly when I'm back in Calgary." "I know you will," she said. And then quieter, almost to herself, "I told you."